Every week, Hillsdale College President Larry Arnn joins Hugh Hewitt to discuss great books, great men, and great ideas. This is Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.
Morning glory and evening grace, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. That music means it's the last broadcast hour of the week, both on radio and on the Salem News Channel of the Hillsdale Dialogue. The Hillsdale Dialogues have been going on for many years. Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College, and I are deep into the first volume of the 6-volume memoir of Winston Churchill of World War II, and we're probably at his lowest moment, though he does come close to death's door a couple of times during the war. But last week, in 1936, Edward VIII had abdicated. Churchill had been booed relentlessly, obliged to sit down. He was not heard by the House, even though he'd held every great office of state except prime minister. And he said his influence had gone to zero. And Dr. Arnn, we wanted to pick up there because he was spent. Winston Churchill was a spent force in 1936. How did he regain his influence, having fallen so far? It's important for everyone to understand this because the revisionists want us to think that Churchill caused World War II.
So the short answer is he talked and he wrote. In politics, in life, there are two ways to get on with somebody. And one is to talk and write, and the other is to fight. And talking and writing are better. But he was a journalist, and he was very widely read, and he was brilliant in the House of Commons, and he commanded a lot of attention. And then one thing happened in the House of Commons, and the other thing happened what we call out of doors. That's anything that happens. Any speech you give, not in the House of Commons, they call it a speech out of doors. In the House of Commons, his speeches were reported, and people started showing up and giving him information. People from the government, people from the military, people from abroad. And all of a sudden, he had a lot of facts at his disposal, and he came in and started talking about them, and they caused a stir. The Baldwin and later the Chamberlain government tried to shut up the people who were giving him those facts. They put pressure on them. That's in the House. He began to win the argument. Then in out of doors, he founded something called the Focus. And that was an all-party, any-friend alliance for building the military to defend the country. And he would say explicitly, socialists are welcome. Everybody's welcome. Anybody who wants our country to be strong enough to prevent, if possible, and if not, to win a war with Germany, you're invited. And there were rallies all over the country. It became a big movement, and he was the leader of it. And that, too, put a lot of pressure. And step by step, the government, and, Churchill never did get the votes to defeat, Stanley Baldwin was the prime minister, and then he retired, and Neville Chamberlain took his place. And he never did get the votes to beat them, but he put enough pressure on them that they abandoned their policy of disarmament and began a policy of rearmament. And then he hectored the heck out of them, really, to do that and to get on with it and do it fast. And they were tardy about that, but it made a difference in 1940 when the battles became acute, especially the air battle, because it proved that Britain had barely enough airplanes to beat off the German assault.
If they had waited another 6 months in rearmament, we'll get into details, they would not have survived 1940 and 41. So, Dr. Arnn, I want to go back and have an explainer again for the Steelers fans. When Baldwin steps down, Neville Chamberlain, who's his Chancellor of the Exchequer, and the son of the great Joseph Chamberlain, who's friends with Winston Churchill, of course, Churchill's friends with everyone, he becomes the prime minister. He has to assemble a government, and he does not call Churchill, even though Churchill started Focus, and even though he's got rebuilding his influence in the House of Commons and correctly pointing out every bad thing that Hitler has done. But he does pick Anthony Eden. And I wanted to give you a lot of room to explain how governments are formed and how prime ministers pick And Anthony Eden comes in. At one point, Churchill said Chamberlain would have been much better served if he'd made Halifax his foreign secretary and sent Eden to the Admiralty, but he did the reverse. What happens when the new prime minister arrives?
Well, so there's 650 seats, and they each elect a member. Nobody in Britain votes for anything except the member of your seat. Generally, but not in all cases, the candidates are members of political parties, and so you get elected parliament, and you become a member of what's called the parliamentary party. So the Conservative members are in the Conservative Parliamentary Party, and when they meet, it's called the 1922 Committee, by the way, which is named after something Stanley Baldwin did. And the Labour guys are the Parliamentary Labour Party. The party that's got the most gets to pick the leader. They generally, in the election, you know who the leader is going to be. He leads the electoral campaign too. And he's going to be prime minister. And then he has to form a cabinet. And so he's got two problems. And one problem is he's got to keep a majority in the parliament or the government will fall. And the other is he's got to keep a majority you got to keep some unity in his party. So when they're trying to be prime minister, when they're trying to get a majority in the parliamentary party to be elected as the prime minister, and they can call an election when they want to, by the way, of the 1922 committee in the case of the Conservatives, then they make a lot of deals. And they pick four kinds of people. They pick people who are close allies. They pick people who are enemies with whom they've made a deal that you can have this if you and your friends will vote for me. They pick people who are highly competent, have a reputation, have knowledge, have ability for this particular thing. And then they make mistakes. Those are the four. And the reason Churchill hoped that Eden would go to one of the military departments instead of the foreign ministry is because Churchill is coming to think that the time for talking is over. We got to build some weapons or we're going to have a war. And it doesn't matter much what we say to these Germans. Churchill recounts a dinner he had with Ribbentrop, the famous German foreign minister under Hitler. And where that issue is, Ribbentrop tells him what Hitler's going to do, which is consolidate Eastern and Central Europe under German power. And if you let us do that, all will be well. And Churchill says, I'm out of the government. I don't speak for the government, but I would not imagine that any British government will agree to that. For that reason that we talked out last week, at the beginning of last week, we don't get on the side of the tyrant who's going to dominate Europe.
Right.
Because in the end, they'll eat us later.
For 400 years, that was the policy of Great Britain. Never allow there to be one big bully in Europe, because they'll cross the channel eventually.
Yeah. That's right. And Churchill describes that in this book repeatedly as, we were willing to do the hard thing. And it's the reason we kept our independence and became a great nation. Ribbentrop says, well, there's going to be a war then. So that diplomatic exchange is a microcosm of what was going on in the world, right? And Churchill said, if there is one, don't make the mistake of taking us lightly, because we may not look to you like much to you right now, but we still are what we have been.
I have the quote. It's so wonderful. This is a private member, Churchill, talking to Ribbentrop. Evil man. You must not underestimate England. She is a curious country and few foreigners understand her mind. Do not judge by the attitude of the present administration, meaning Chamberlain. Do not underrate England. She is very clever. If you plunge us into another great war, she will bring the whole world against you, like the last time. And he never meets with Hitler. Ribbentrop wanted to meet with Hitler. He just, I don't need to do that. And sure enough, they did exactly what Churchill said they would do. In 1938, though, he's not in the government. Again, to the revisionists out there, He's a private member at this point, and not particularly on good terms with Neville Chamberlain. And we're going to pick up there next week and in the next segment. Don't go anywhere, America, because it's very important to get our timeline down. Churchill is the guy who could have stopped World War II, but he wasn't in power. That's the key thing. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn on the Hillsdale Dialogue, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. All the dialogues at hughforhillsdale.com. Come right back.
It's no secret that Americans are more divided than ever. And it's not just over what policies will improve our great country. No, it's over whether America is great at all, whether America deserves our love. That's why Imprimis is so important. Imprimis looks at the issues of the day from a constitutional perspective, reminding citizens always of our great heritage of liberty. For more than 50 years, Imprimis has featured speeches from the smartest conservative thinkers and writers at Hillsdale events. These days, Hillsdale publishes people like Molly Hemingway, Andy Puzder, Harmeet Dillon, and Chris Rufo. Over 6.4 million American households and businesses receive Imprimis absolutely free. And I urge you to sign up for it today at no charge. To get your free lifetime subscription, go to hillsdale.edu/lifetime right now.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn. The Hillsdale Dialogue underway, last broadcast hour of the week. We're about to turn to the departure of Anthony Eden from the Neville Chamberlain government. Dr. Arnn, let's turn now to Anthony Eden, because it is striking to me. There are a lot of striking things in this book, but on February 20th, 1938, Eden resigns from Chamberlain's government. And Churchill says he got news of it late in the night of February 20th as a telephone message reached me in my old room at Chartwell, as I sit often now. And he said he could always fall asleep. He could flop on the bed, never had trouble sleeping. But now on this night of February 20th, 1938, and on this occasion only, sleep deserted me, consumed by the emotions of sorrow and fear. There seemed to be one strong young figure standing up against the long, dismal, drawling, D-R-A-W-L-I-N-D, drawling tides of drift and surrender, of wrong measurement and feeble impulse. There seemed one young, strong figure capable of standing up, and he seemed to me at this moment to embody the life hope of the British nation, the grand old British race that had done so much for men and yet some more to give. Now he was gone. I watched the daylight slowly creep in through the windows and saw before me, in mental gaze, the vision of death. That's poetry. I also think it's completely true.
Yeah. Well, Churchill is, aren't we all like this, by the way? If you like the Republicans, you have more trust in what the government is doing when they're in power. And Eden and Churchill became very close. Eden had a long and successful marriage with Churchill's brother's daughter. So Eden became his nephew. And they were close for the rest of their lives from this time. And Eden succeeded Churchill and was a hands-down favorite to do it. A thing to know about Eden was that he was very handsome man and very commanding, tall, good-looking. Churchill was neither tall nor, I think he was good-looking, but he's so famous the way he looked that he just looks like Winston Churchill to me. C.S. Lewis writes that he looks like a frog. Yeah. But Eden was a lovely man and very impressive man. I don't believe that he was as great a man as Winston Churchill, and he was not a successful prime minister. And he did his best work when he was following Winston Churchill, in my opinion. But he did that for many years. And remember, he's in the middle of the crowd that's controlling the Conservative Party and thinks they've done great. And Baldwin, Churchill gives a wonderful in this thing. The book, by the way, is very worth reading for anybody here. Because if you want to understand practical life, how to act in practical life, how things work, Aristotle says we should study statesmanship. And statesmanship is a study of the interplay of character and purposes and circumstances. And they're all changing all the time. Character doesn't change very fast, but it's hard to estimate. And so friendship is rare because it takes time to develop friendship. Churchill and Eden got one. right? But you can't do that with very many people. So he's got a friend in there, and he trusts him, and he thinks his character's good, and it was. And now he's gone. And that means you can't be sure they won't do something even worse. And Churchill just looked at that with dread. And another thing is, if he's the foreign minister and he resigns, it means he's not getting his way and doesn't think he can get his way.
It's a matter of great significance. Yeah. When a foreign minister quits.
Let's think if
Marco Rubio walked out on Donald Trump right now, that's what I was about to say. Yeah.
This is worse than that because Marco Rubio is in an appointed position. He has been in an elected position, but the cabinet is not in America. But in Britain, you have to be a person with a constituency of real political support to be in one of those prime ministries. And so if he walks out and the government survives, that means if you like what he was doing, that something is weaker in an important way. And so that's a blow, and at a time when you don't need any more blows.
And he already knows. You mentioned last week, Churchill has a private intelligence network of people who are talking to him, and Baldwin and Chamberlain tried to stop it occasionally, and it wasn't any good. And one of those guys comes by to see Churchill out at Chartwell, and they spend the whole day together. They swim together. They're having a fine time. Everything's going well. And then the fellow is about to leave, and he turns around on page 229, if you want to find it in the memoir. He blurts out, the Germans are spending 1,000 million pounds sterling a year on armaments. The Germans are spending 1,000 million pounds a year on their armaments. Page 203. Now, I don't know. 100 pounds in 1936 is 9,000 pounds today. So the calculation is 9,000 times a million. And I don't do math, but it's a lot. And nobody knew it. And Churchill took that to the parliament and made great use of it.
Yeah, 9 billion. Is that right? But that's, and Chamberlain, Chamberlain's response is very significant. If you raise it, I will confirm it. That means Chamberlain's saying he already knew it. And see, when he gives these, when I said that character matters, Churchill gives a description of Baldwin and Chamberlain, and close to each other in this chapter. And it's a very interesting description because it's sort of the character of those two people. And Churchill thought that Baldwin was a good man, devious, soft, placid, weak. He thought Chamberlain was overconfident. He thought that Chamberlain thought he knew a lot. And Chamberlain, this is happening a few months later when the Munich crisis comes up in 1938. Chamberlain inserts himself into the middle of it in this very dramatic way. Something Stanley Baldwin never did and would never have done, probably. He invites himself and travels to Germany to talk to Hitler in the middle of the crisis. And that means he made himself responsible for it.
Yep, he got stuck with it, and we'll talk about that when we come back. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu, including all the online courses, the application, your free subscription to Imprimis, the monthly speech digest. It's all at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Arnn and I are talking about the three major powers that are interconnected here as the approach of World War II looms, and that is England, France, and Germany.
England is important at this time because France is what we call a frontline state. It had a bigger army than England, but now Germany's got a bigger army. Germany has built that army in the last 4 years. 5 years earlier, France had a much bigger army and much more capable. And so France needs England. They need them to help them. They could be engulfed here, which, by the way, soon enough they are. And so when Chamberlain does that, he just takes control of the situation and is accountable for that for all time.
It sticks to him.
We'll talk about it. Yeah.
Well, I do want to pause with Eden in the Foreign Office.
Guys,
go ahead.
The limits of these two guys, they're differing limits, the way they different limits and excellences. Those become very important historical facts. They have an enormous influence on events. And they appear rather like accidents. In other words, you couldn't predict that. There's no science of history that can tell you you're going to get this guy, right? And Churchill, all his life, he writes this in many places, he thinks that's terribly important because that means that it's not just trends and some great historical engine that changes everything. It's what we do. If Baldwin and Chamberlain messed up the situation in ways that terrified Churchill and terrified and compromised England, the fact that they could do that means that somebody else might have done better. And then we can try to do better. Choices matter very much.
And the analogy to today, when Putin invaded Ukraine the second time, had there been a Baldwin in Kyiv as opposed to Zelensky, there would be no Ukraine today. And Zelensky said, I don't need a ride, I need ammunition. And so nobody counted on a comedian showing up at the right time at the right moment. And by contrast, in Israel, if it hadn't been Netanyahu, who made some mistakes and may have to pay the price for those mistakes because of 10/7, but Iran might have a nuclear weapon today. But for Trump and Netanyahu being the best of buddies and willing to do what England wasn't willing to do in 1936 when the treaty was breached. Stop them.
That's right. That's very right. See, and we don't know, who else is going to do that? Israel has produced quite a number of good politicians, quite a other bad ones too. And there's, one of the reasons for that is that's a frontline state. I used that word before. That means they're always under pressure and everybody does military service. And they've been fortunate often in their leadership and sometimes unfortunate too, which, by the way, is the way of the world. That's, the problem in Plato's Republic is only the philosophers can rule, but they won't.
But they don't want to.
Well, yeah, they don't want to, and we can't make them because we don't know who they are. So that's right. These the accident of Adolf Hitler. There's a lot of people like Hitler in Germany at this time, by the way, but he's the one who won. He was the meanest of them, probably, and a very ruthless man. And then, it can't be an accident that Stalin got the whip hand after Lenin and destroyed the others and led the world on a dance for, how long was he in?
30 years. 24 to 56. Yeah, a nightmare.
Yeah.
A nightmare. Yeah. Now, I did not want to pass over that diplomacy can work. Hawks need to know this. Diplomacy can work. When Italy started sinking ships, Eden goes off and enlists France, and they, with the advice of Churchill to go and sink pirates, they get Italy to stop sinking vessels because they threatened Italy with a credible deterrent. So diplomacy can work if you've got the goods, right? If you've rearmed.
And one of the greatest courses I had in graduate school was taught by a man named Harold Brood, who was a very realist kind of guy in foreign policy, a brilliant man. It's called Diplomacy and Military Power. And come to find out, you got to have both.
You got to have both. You got to have both. And unfortunately, sometimes America forgets that lesson. More with Dr. Arnn coming up. Remember, all of our dialogues on the World War II series are collected at Hugh for Hillsdale.com. Everything Hillsdale at Hillsdale.edu. Come right back.
Hello, this is Jeremiah Regan, and I have some great news. We've brought Hillsdale's incredibly popular free online courses to the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. The Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast brings you our online courses in their entirety, with courses ranging from ancient history and biblical epics to foundational political principles and the future of American citizenship. Follow the Hillsdale College Online Courses Podcast to hear new episodes every week with additional commentary and insights from our team. Go to podcast.hillsdale.edu to learn more. That's podcast.hillsdale.edu.
Welcome back, America. Hugh Hewitt with Dr. Larry Arnn, president of Hillsdale College. All things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. Dr. Arnn, you were saying we went to break the importance of diplomacy as well as military strength.
I just had a really great guy, I might have mentioned him last week, called Wes Mitchell on the campus.
Yes.
He wrote a brilliant paper saying we're entering an era where diplomacy is going to be more important to us because we have left that artificial and brief period when we had all the power in the world. And now we're, falling behind even. And so we're going to need allies and we're going to have to talk. And of course, if you go in there unarmed, the famous quote that Stalin asked about the Pope when the French politician went to see him, and the French politician mentioned Flandin, who it was. The Pope will have an opinion, and Stalin said, "And how many divisions has he got?"
Yeah.
So military power is the price of getting in the room. But I
want to recommend, again, the reason we read old books, Churchill's old memoir. There's a story in here about FDR I have never seen anywhere, even in the magnificent book by your colleague there, the name of which is eluding me right now, Wilfred McClay's book on American history. FDR offers to have everyone from Europe come to America, and he will mediate. I have never heard this anywhere. I've never read it before. And Neville Chamberlain blows it off. And Churchill writes that Mr. Chamberlain, with his limited outlook and inexperience of the European scene, should have possessed the self-sufficiency to wave away the proffered hand stretched out across the Atlantic, leaves one, even at this date, breathless with amazement. So Chamberlain was really out of his league when it came to managing international affairs. Different kind of guy.
Well, he was cocky. He was.
Yep.
I once said to a student of mine who's a very good guy, I won't say his name, he was insisting on something for a while. And I said, stubborn and wrong is a bad combination. And and it was a little thing, actually. I remember what it was now. He thought he knew the way to get someplace where we were trying to get to, and he was lost. And he kept on, And so anyway, Chamberlain was very assertive, right? He was a very firm man. And Churchill, by the way, respected Chamberlain more than he respected Baldwin. He thinks, he writes of Baldwin that Baldwin did things, especially this thing where he said, we didn't rearm because we would have lost an election.
Right.
And Churchill speaks very strongly about that. We'll get there, but his eulogy of Neville Chamberlain is a very beautiful thing. And but these are days. Remember, if you're thinking about that war, if all you know is that there was a war, then what you've got to think is there had to be a war then. There was a war. There had to be a war, right? But if you study it, there are many points here where this war the conditions could have been fundamentally changed and likely the war delayed or prevented. And Churchill is going through these in this book, right? And that means that our choices matter very much. And there's an art to that, right? That's called practical judgment. And it's a high art. It's important. And it's all, alas, rare. So this, and if Chamberlain, by the time Chamberlain comes along in 1938, Germany is very hard to stop. They've got the wind at their sails now. They've built a big old army. They got the whole nation organized for war, and they're aggressive, right? Churchill thinks, but the opportunities to forestall it are narrowing all the time, right? Churchill thought better to fight over Czechoslovakia now because they've got some strength. We're going to have to fight. Chamberlain thought, I've put it away for all time, peace in our time, by giving up the land that was the basis of the Czech ability to defend itself.
And there is a good place to conclude this week. Churchill comments on sending Lord Halifax, the foreign secretary, to meet with Hitler, and says one could hardly conceive of two personalities less able to comprehend one another, and notes that every Englishman who met with the German Führer in these years were embarrassed or compromised. Hitler had a power of fascinating men. And I was thinking about that. I'd read this before President Trump met with General Secretary Xi, and Trump's a strong man, not a weak man. Like I get Lord Halifax is sort of weak, and Neville Chamberlain, as you said, is stubborn. That's a bad combination as well, stubborn and weak. And I'm not worried about Trump meeting with anyone the way I would be if Biden went to see Xi, for example, when Biden was enfeebled. This is a lesson. That's why these books matter, is that you kind of practical guidance for statesmen.
Yeah. And, one should take away, because, when you read the newspaper, reading history is like reading the newspaper, except the picture is more complete because you know what happened later. And you should read it both as if it's happening now, and and you don't know what's happening later, but you should also remember that you do know. And it's a characteristic of Churchill's history, way of writing history, that he's questing for the places when better choices might have made better things, might have made better things happen. He wants to demonstrate that, and all his history is written around that. So this Gathering Storm is a story of how we could have avoided this, and in that way we can learn how to do it better next time. Although the circumstances will be different, we can study the circumstances and the puzzles that are presented to us in the knowledge that there's likely to be something we can do that can stop this.
It's almost an absolute certainty that there will be knowledge there that we can apply to today and tomorrow. That's why we do the Hillsdale Dialogues. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back with Dr. Arnn, except maybe over to hillsdale.edu or hughforhillsdale.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. We're kind of in the sweet spot for Dr. Arnn. He knows so much about Churchill. He's the equal of any Churchill scholar alive and breathing on the planet. And he teaches a Churchill seminar every now and then at Hillsdale, all things Hillsdale at hillsdale.edu. So a key question, Dr. Arnn. We have 2 minutes. And that means when you teach Churchill, the seminar, do you read The Gathering Storm? Because I find it's just fascinating what happened in the 33 to 38.
Bits of it, yeah. I read bits of it. There are things in here. Churchill's main themes, in my Churchill class, I take those. How many books are there?
6.
You count his correspondence, speeches. There are.
You mean all of his books?
Churchill's writing consumes about 70 big volumes, right? So we don't read all that. I've read it, but what I do is I take the things that I think demonstrate the main points, and so there's some things in this chapter that do that. The world crisis is very good. We've talked about that, right?
Yep.
That's that's written with real insight, because some of the things in there Churchill is figuring out now because of these amazing events he's been through. And you want what he wants us to think, because he says it. I know is what he says he wants us to think. Is that we need to study crucial events toward the right purposes with the view to keeping the worst things from happening and getting better things to happen. And we can do that. Churchill is not a fatalist. And remember, this war is the reason we know the name Winston Churchill. He won his glory in this war. It's the reason the people who hate him attack him today, right? But his account of this war, this is a very dramatic thing, is that it could have been and it should have been prevented. And his account is that it was a disaster, that it was not.
And on that note, Dr. Larry Arnn, thank you. We will be back with our next edition as we head into the years of trial are very close. It's February 38, the middle of 38, actually, when we leave off here, and we'll pick up here again when we return to Churchill in a couple of weeks. Dr. Larry Arnn, thank you. All things Hillsdale can be found at hillsdale.edu. All of our prior dialogues at hughforhillsdale.com, including, I think we now had a dozen on World War II. And we'll be back again next week. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Harley. Thank you, Generalissimo. Thanks all of you for listening, and we'll talk to you Monday on the next Hugh Hewitt Show.
Thanks for listening to the Hillsdale Dialogues, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. For more information about Hillsdale College, head to hillsdale.edu.